Hi, it's Tim Kelley with another video in our series on the new paradigm of business. This is a very special video for a couple reasons. One is that this is the last video that I'm recording where it'll be just me talking. Future videos will be interviews with various business leaders and thought leaders who are actively involved in creating the new paradigm of business. The other reason is this video is a very interesting topic, which is how will the new paradigm of business be defined? This is a question I find that really hasn't been asked thoroughly at all. And as you'll see when we talk about the video, the processes that are being used to define the new paradigm of business are actually very old paradigm. And not intentionally, people are really doing their best, but we can't get to the new paradigm of business using old paradigm techniques. You'll see what I mean. Good. So how will we define the new paradigm of business? Let me start by talking about the processes that we're currently using and answering a few key questions here. So one key question is, well, who exactly is going to do the defining of the new paradigm of business? So let's look at who's doing it currently. Well, there's really two sets of folks doing it. One is business leaders and thought leaders like business school professors or consultants like myself who are advocating for some aspect of the new paradigm of business, usually one aspect per thought leader, meaning that that particular thought leader has grasped onto a piece of what they believe is the new paradigm and is actively speaking, writing, implementing that particular feature. So what we have is a bunch of different individuals, each one carrying around and advocating for a single feature of the new paradigm. Well, if we look at those features, we find that for the most part, there are two different kinds of features. One is what I would call tweaks, in the sense that we're taking the current paradigm and trying to improve it in some way. An example of that would be corporate social responsibility. Let's make these big hierarchical for-profit companies behave more responsibly. This is a patch or an add-on. Or let's make the leaders who are running these large hierarchical for-profit companies more conscious so that they'll be more responsible with their power, as I discussed in the last video. Both of these are examples of modifying some feature of the current paradigm rather than redesigning it from the ground up. So we've got some patches, add-ons, and tweaks being advocated. Another one we see is, or I see anyway, is advocating for a very vague principle where it's not entirely clear how to put it into effect. For example, a love-based business. Businesses should be love-based. And someone will write a book about this and speak about this. And it's no doubt true and sounds great in theory, but it's not actually a new system, if you will. And so there are a number of people out there advocating for a certain principle or viewpoint, other people out there advocating for tweaks, and there are, as I've been highlighting in these video series and will continue to do so in the interview series, there are people out there who have pieces of what really looks like a systematic portion of the new paradigm. But no single coherent picture of the entire thing is available anywhere as far as I can tell. I did have a shot at that in my last video, but it's still not terribly clear. Good. So that's what I would call the top-down crew. These are thought leaders, business professors, consultants who are advocating for different pieces of what they believe is the new paradigm. We also have what I would call the bottom-up crew. And these are people who are generally dissatisfied with the way business is currently being run and feel disenfranchised because of it, with good reason in many cases, and are very angry about it, also with good reason in many cases. Occupy Wall Street being the most obvious version of this, but there are many other versions as well. And these people are really interested in changing the system much more radically, but from a place of anger or judgment about the current system. And they too don't necessarily have a very clear picture of what it is they want to implement in its stead, just that they don't like the way it's currently working and would like that to stop. So unfortunately, none of this really creates a single picture, although it does tend to give us windows into some pieces or aspects of the current paradigm, and some things that are frankly tweaks to the old paradigm masquerading as new paradigm features. Good. So then the clear question that I would ask from this is, well, who will define the new paradigm? Will it be a top-down process in which top leaders, like the World Business Academy has done, will gather together and define the new paradigm in private? Or will it be a bottom-up, community-led process? And I've had very smart change agents tell me that it has to be community-led, it has to be bottom-up. Well, the difficulty with both of these approaches is that they're both exclusive win-lose approaches. We define the paradigm, and you have to live with it. And that is, in fact, the very heart of the old paradigm, which is win-lose. Whereas the new paradigm is win-win and inclusive, which means that the definition of the new paradigm will be both a top-down process and a bottom-up process, top-down and bottom-up. Because if it's either top-down or bottom-up, then it becomes a win-lose process, and that's now the current paradigm, and we can't define the new paradigm using the techniques of the old paradigm. Good. So that's the who. The who is everybody. It's top-down and bottom-up. So then the how. How do we go about defining the new paradigm? Well, in my view, there are certain questions that need to be answered, and this comes from my work with a group of thought leaders who are actively working to come up with a coherent picture of the new paradigm. You'll hear more about them in the future. That there are certain questions we need to answer as a society about business in order to have a clear definition of the new paradigm. One question, a very interesting one, is what is the purpose of business? Now, many people will say that the purpose of business, and the purpose of business is to generate profit. Well, that's actually a circular answer. Generating profit only makes sense in the context of business, and therefore it's a self-fulfilling prophecy answer, a circular definition. The better way to ask the question is, what is the role of business in an enlightened, evolved society? So if we really had heaven on earth, I would argue we would have business. And the question is, what would business be doing in this evolved society of the future? Another way of asking the question is, what would need to be true about business that we were all grateful and thankful that business existed and was a part of our lives, which is not currently the case. So this is the question, what is the higher purpose of business? What is its role in an enlightened society? We don't really know what the role of business is in society. In fact, there's a great deal of debate about which things properly belong in the domain of business and which belong in the domain of nonprofits or government, for example. Good. Another question is, what are the values of business? Now, many businesses individually identify their own mission or their own values. This is the question of what are the values of business generally for all business everywhere on the planet? What are the guiding principles that tell us that business is operating properly, that all businesses are operating properly? These values are not clear at all. And they could lead to some sort of ethical standards, which wouldn't be a bad thing either. But what are the values of business? Another great question is the vision question. And I would suggest that there are actually two visions for business. One vision for business is, what's the vision of the world that business could create if it were operating absolutely magnificently according to its higher purpose? What would the impact of business be on the world? For example, that people lead deeply fulfilled lives and their basic individual needs are met might be good side effects of business performing its higher purpose properly. Another question is, what will business look like? A very important vision question. What will business look like and how will it operate in this new world that business creates? It's a very, very powerful institution and has great potential to create change. What would it look like if it were successful at that? We really don't know. Good. So, and then as a sort of adjunct to that, there's subsets of that, right? What many people are focusing on, and rightly so, is the vision for what one new paradigm company will look like. Very important question. But there are other larger scale questions, which is, what will a new paradigm market or a new paradigm industry look like? What would a market look like if it were rooted in win-win rather than win-lose? We had an earlier video about the myth of competition producing the best possible results. So what does it look like if we're not relying on cutthroat win-lose competition in order to produce efficiency and the best results? What happens in a win-win world where we're trying to produce the best results using win-win based strategies? What would a market look like? What would an industry look like? We really don't know. So there's the individual company question, and then there's the collective of companies operating together. Good. So this is the process. So we have a top-down and bottom-up process to involve many different stakeholders in collectively defining the new paradigm of business by finding its higher purpose, finding its values, finding the vision for the world that it could create, and the vision for what business will look like, how it will be structured and how it will operate, both on the scale of a single company and on the scale of many companies operating together in a market or an industry. Good. So these are not theoretical questions. These are real questions that have real answers. And I look forward to involving you in collective processes to help us answer these questions and define exactly what the answers to these questions are. Good. And of course, we'll also have the interview series coming up where you'll get to hear thought leaders answer some of these questions and talk about their individual visions and their individual pieces of the new paradigm that they have been able to identify. Talk to you soon.